Welcome back to our intermediate financial accounting class. This is our special lecture on time value of money. Again, for those of you comfortable with the concepts already, you probably don't need to go through all of this, but there's a lot of fun calculations that you might want to just enjoy since it's so much fun. No journal entries, but still cool calculations. For those of you who aren't as comfortable with time value, then hopefully this will be a useful experience walking through some of these basic principles. Again, pun totally intended. In our last couple of segments, we've talked about the basics of time value, the ideas of interest, what goes into interest, how interest is calculated, simple versus compound, and the power of time when you're making decisions about how much to compound your interest. Now it's time to talk about things a little bit more formally, switching away from just simple interest to the business concept of time value of money. And it all comes back to the basic idea we've already discussed, that $1 today is worth more than $1 10 years from now. When we're making business decisions, we want to take into effect the time value of money, how money adjusts over time, both for risk, for pure rate, and for inflation. Now, this time value idea, again, just a slightly more formal version of what we've already done. We use it primarily for business decisions, but we also use it for personal decisions. So we're going to try to hit it from both sides. The difference between future value and current value is referred to time value of money. For personal decisions, we can use both future and present value, but primarily we use present value for accounting and for other business decisions. Why? Because we're making decisions today in the present, or we're having to do the journal entries today. We're not doing them in 10 years. So we record long-term assets at their present value oftentimes, and we record long-term debts a lot of times at their present value. Whether the money is coming to us or the money is going to somebody else and we're going to collect it, one way or another, we're using time value and present value to decide what we should invest and how we should record it today. So let's take a minute and talk about the difference between future value and present value. Future value is how much money invested today is going to be worth in the future. Some of this is inflation, some of it's pure rate, some of it's risk rate, those same basic interest ideas, but we want to know, if I invest $100 today, I'll get $106 in the future. And then the business decision is, should I invest today or not? Present value is the opposite. How much is money in the future worth in today dollars? And this is more common, again, for our business decisions in accounting, because usually we're thinking about making payments over the next 20 years or receiving payments for the next 20 years. And since the payments are in the future, the decision is being made today with a present value. And so the question is, if you are offering to pay me $106 in a year, will I invest $100 with you today? So let's take a look at some examples of this and how we decide whether it's present value or future value. Hopefully that'll really help to solidify this concept. So first off, we've got Joan's grandpa. She promised her $20,000 when she graduates from college in 4 years. So he's trying to give her an incentive to get all the way through her college education. We want to know what the value of that $20,000 is today if we use a discount or interest rate of 12%. The question is this a present value or a future value? Well, the key here is the fact that the $20,000 will be paid in 4 years. So that's the future value of the money, what she's actually going to get 4 years from now. So this must be a present value problem because we want to know what it's worth today. If the grandpa can find a 12% interest rate at a bank or in a CD or something like that, how much would he invest today to have the $20,000 4 years from now? Same kind of a question, and still focused on present value. Next, Adam recently purchased a new TV for $5,000 on his credit card. If his interest rate is 12% compounded quarterly, how much is Adam going to owe in 5 years? Now, this is the other side of the coin, again, pun totally intended, where we know the amount today, $5,000 for a current TV, so we must be looking for the future value. And I will give you one little hint on this whole present value, future value thing. Most of the time, future value refers to some kind of savings. It doesn't in this case. So this is one of the exceptions, but 9 out of 10 times, when you're talking about future value, there's some kind of saving involved. Let's take a look at two more. Joan won the Georgia lottery. It pays $1 million a year for 20 years. If Joan plans to save each of these payments until she has received all of her money, how much will she have once the last payment is made? assume that her bank pays 3% interest. In this case, it's future value again. Why? Because we're saving. Remember, that was our shortcut idea, was that if it's future value, some kind of savings will be involved. But hopefully it also makes sense. I'm going to make a series of payments or investments now. What will it be worth in the future, out there, when I get the last payment? That's a future value problem because the end result is out in the future somewhere. The last one, 1 year before retiring, Lindsay was offered an opportunity to buy an annuity. It will pay her $35,000 a year for the next 12 years. What is the maximum amount Lindsay should be willing to pay for this offer, assuming that the appropriate discount rate is 10%? The payments are in the future, so I'm trying to decide, or Lindsay's trying to decide, what she should invest today. So that's a present value. Now hopefully that idea, those concepts make sense, and how we decide present versus future value clicks. If you're not feeling comfortable, there's lots of great examples out there. You can Google or go to a financial accounting textbook, find that time value chapter, and usually at the back of those chapters it has a bunch of these exercises you can go through and decide future, present, and run through some examples that way. Once we know whether it's a future value or present value problem, then the next thing we need to do is gather all of the necessary information to calculate the value. So here's a list of the information that we need to gather. Number one, we have to decide what type of problem it is. Is it present value or future value? Is it a lump sum or an annuity? We'll talk about those terms, lump sum versus annuity, in just a second, but we need to know that too. Next, we need to figure out the interest rate per period, and the interest rate we use depends on the kind of question that we're answering. So usually in a simple time value problem like this one, the interest rate is what we would normally be able to make as an individual on our own, or what I normally make on my investment. So if I'm making 10% in the stock market, if I'm going to pull money out of the stock market, I better still make 10%. We refer to this as an effective rate, a discount rate, and sometimes a market rate. So there's lots of different terms for this interest rate of what we think we should be making on this investment. And you need to be familiar with all of those different terms because you're going to see them all the time. Again, the most common: effective rate, discount rate, market rate, and I'll add one more: internal rate of return. So another key concept, being comfortable with the different names we can give to the interest rate we use in a time value problem. In addition to the interest rate, we want to know the number of periods, not years, but periods or payments that it will be compounded over. Could be a payment or no payment, but we want to know how many periods are involved. Next, we need to know the principal, how much was invested or how much is going to be paid back, either way, depending on the question. And finally, if there are any interest payments being made, how much are they? So that's our necessary information. And in order to feel really comfortable with this, we need to go back and talk about that whole lump sum versus annuity thing. We mentioned that in the first bullet, but we didn't actually take a second to talk about it. So let's do that now. Payments can be made in several different ways, and we're going to focus on 3 of them now. There are a couple of others, but these are the most common payment types. The first is a lump sum. This is one big payment that's made either at the beginning of the period or at the end of the period, depends on whether it's a future or present value problem. But usually we're looking at one big amount. So if I'm going to save $5,000 and I want to know what it's worth at the end, that's a lump sum, one big payout at the end of these next few years. If I'm going to invest $20,000 today and want to withdraw a certain amount every year for the next 10 years, then it's not a lump sum because I'm making multiple withdrawals. And that becomes an annuity. And that's the next thing we want to talk about. An annuity is a series of identical payments that are made at the end each period. So think interest payments here, or mortgage payments, or car payments. It's the same amount due every single month. I have to make these specific payments. That's an annuity. And it's this ordinary annuity means that the payments are made at the end rather than at the beginning of each period. And that's the most common. Last thing we want to mention is what we call an annuity due. Same idea, it's still an annuity, an identical series of payments, but this time payments are made at the beginning of the period. And the best example of an annuity due is some kind of a lease. Think about moving into that first apartment. You had to pay that first month's rent before you even walked in the door. Or if you go to a rent-to-own place, you typically have to pay that first month's rent before you leave with the new TV or the couch or whatever it is. Why? Because they want to make sure that you have at least that first month's rent before they get you started. And that brings us to the calculations that we need to make. There are 3 ways that we can do these calculations for time value. The first is to use a financial calculator. The second is to use the exponential functions. The third is to use the tables, and there is one other way. It's a little bit harder to do when you're on the go, and that is to use Excel or another spreadsheet program, because most spreadsheet programs, Excel especially, does time value very, very well. So these are the three ways we can do it. The functions are pretty long and hard to memorize, but if you're good with that, you can memorize them. You can use the tables if you're sure you'll have access to the tables. If you're not, probably not the best option. The best way is probably to become comfortable with either a calculator or with Excel, but you want to have options other than Excel because you're not always going to have your laptop or your spreadsheet with you. So the best option is actually to use a financial calculator. And I will tell you one quick story here about financial calculators. If you've had the opportunity to go car shopping, you probably know that it's like being circled by sharks, because you walk onto a car lot and the salesmen just kind of circle around you trying to make a sale. And I noticed, though, my wife and I went car shopping, and I took with me my financial calculator because I wanted to make sure that the deal they were going to offer me was a good deal. And no one would talk to me. Nobody. They saw this calculator in my hand. Nobody. There was no circling. There was nobody around. Everybody found something else to do. Nobody wanted to talk to us. And we finally found a car we liked, and I handed the calculator to my wife and I said, "Put this in your pocket." Or in your purse, excuse me. And she said, "Why?" And I told her, "Just do it, just do it." And literally, she put it in her purse. It was like a hole opened up, and out popped a salesman. The instant that calculator wasn't there, somebody walked right over and started to talk to us, and we started to go through it. And we walked back to his cubicle to start running numbers, and I reached over to my wife and said, "Give me my calculator back." And you should have seen his face. He was so disappointed that I knew what I was doing. We weren't able to make a deal with that particular individual. But anyway, having a good financial calculator, good way to do car shopping without being bugged. If you really want to not be bugged, take both the calculator and a blue book, and you will have to tackle somebody before they'll even talk to you, because they don't want anything to do with somebody with a blue book and a financial calculator. Anyway, just a fun aside there, but really the calculators are the best way to do it, if you can. For now, though, we're going to focus on the tables, because I know everybody's got access to the tables, because you can get them in any intermediate accounting textbook. They're usually at the end of the time value chapter. In KESO and some of the others, it's chapter 6, or you might find them at the end. But you should have a time value table there. If not, you can certainly Google time value table or present value table or annuity table, and you'll get millions of options that will come up. Now, we've talked all about the different ideas and the different pieces of time value, what's involved. When we come back in our next segment, we're going to start doing the calculations for those 4 examples that we just looked at. I'll see you then.